I don't know about you, but I got into filmmaking because I wanted to learn about the world. I wanted to see things and do things and meet people that normal people don't really get to. I think that's part of the reason why I like shooting so much. You're literally the person who is interpreting the story for the audience. You're like a filter that the real world passes through on its way to becoming a documentary film. But once that footage is captured, you are nowhere even close to finished. In my experience, post-production is where the bulk of the work in filmmaking goes, and that's where the real story is shaped. The problem is, when you're opening that hard drive with all your shots on it, how do you even start trying to make sense of it all? Let's talk about that. Hey guys, welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Luke Forsyth, documentary cinematographer and filmmaker. And on this channel, I teach the skills I've learned over 10 years working in the documentary industry. Turning hours or sometimes hundreds of hours of raw footage into a powerful film or TV show can be incredibly daunting. But over the years, I found a simple 3-step post-production workflow that will start you off on the right footing and make finding your story among the mountains of shots way easier. So where do we start? The first time I realized how hard post-production was, I was still working as a photojournalist. Photographers in general can be very wary of video, but I convinced myself I could do it, and I pitched a story that I thought would be good to an editor at a big international newspaper. Kinda to my horror, he accepted it. I mean, I was happy to have the job and excited to try something new, but I really had no idea what I was doing, and I honestly had only used the video setting on my camera once or twice before. I call this kind of feeling a happy dread, and if you're a creator who's ever tried something new for the first time, you probably know what I mean. You get what you wanted, but it's actually more than you think you can comfortably handle, and deep down you're terrified. Comment down below if you've got a good happy dread moment of your own. Anyways, the story I pitched was about Cambodia's first female MMA fighter. She was a total badass woman doing something very unconventional in a country that's pretty conservative, especially for women. All the story elements were there, I just didn't know what to do with them. But because I'd stupidly sold the story already, I had no choice but to head out to her house in Phnom Penh and start filming. Thankfully, I knew my basic video settings and got some great visuals of her training and working out, and we also shot a solid interview. On the way back at the end of the day, I actually felt pretty good, and I went to sleep thinking, this video thing isn't such a big deal. I don't know what I was so scared of. Then I woke up the next morning and looked over at my camera with the memory card still in it, and I panicked. I mean, what the hell was I supposed to do next? Luckily, I had a friend who worked as a video journalist at the Phnom Penh Post. The first question he asked me was, have you backed up yet? And that's the first step in the post-production workflow, back up your footage. It might seem painfully obvious, but if you do this wrong, it can mess you up big time. Not only do you risk losing your shots, but if you don't do it properly, it can be extremely frustrating to try and find what you have later. Creating a clear and consistent naming structure is the key to starting this off well. Unless a client asks for something very specific, I generally like to make a new folder that starts with the date, then comes the shoot, then the camera, and then finally the card number. Even if you're only shooting with one camera and one card, getting into the habit of using this convention will allow you to stay consistent when you eventually grow into multicam shoots. Every professional shoot I've been on has asked for some variation on this structure, and I've never yet met an editor who isn't happy with this format. There's an old military saying that 2 is 1 and 1 is none, and that's true for digital files. Basically, it means that unless you have 2 copies of something, you might as well have 0 copies because you're putting yourself in danger. So make yourself a second backup and don't format the cards until it's done. You can do this in a bunch of ways depending on what you have, but whatever you do, don't settle for a single backup. I used to do this with a set of external USB hard drives, but then eventually I had way too much data and I had a stack like this big. Right now I use a Drobo, which has a bunch of slots for 3.5-inch drives, and it uses some fancy algorithm to distribute the data more efficiently. To be honest, I don't really know what it's doing, but it seems to work most of the time. If I was starting out again though, I wouldn't recommend Drobo because whatever their system does to distribute the data, it makes the drive unreadable in any other device but a Drobo, and I personally don't like being restricted to a single company. So if I could go back in time, I'd get a more generic brand like ones that Otherworld Computing sells. The ultimate setup, and what I'm saving for right now, is a NAS system, which is basically a giant hard drive that creates its own remote access network. That means you can access it from anywhere in the world as long as you have an internet connection. So say I'm on a shoot somewhere, I don't know, Argentina, I can still send my favorite shots back to my hard drive in Vancouver as long as I have an internet connection. Likewise, if I'm working with an editor in New York, they can access my drive without needing physical contact with it. The downside is that these things are really expensive, like $2,000–$3,000 sometimes. But considering this is where your life's work is gonna live, it's a pretty good investment, I think. Now don't feel pressured to go for a $2,000 system if you're just starting out. Just start with what you can afford and scale up as you need to. But whatever you go with, always make sure you have your footage backed up twice. One final tip, if you've got a bunch of cards from different cameras, you don't want to run the risk that you forget to back one of them up. To make sure I'm not missing any of the cards, I make 2 boxes out of tape next to my computer, one on every side. I label them in and out. When the shoot wraps, I put all the cards into the in box, and then one by one I put them in the out box. This might be overkill and seems silly if you're doing small shoots with just a couple of cards, but I've been on shoots where there are 40 or 50 or even more cards to back up every day. And without a system like this, it's so easy to miss one. Okay, so you've got the footage double backed up, but that's no closer to a finished story than you were when the footage was still on the memory cards. You've opened up Final Cut or Premiere or iMovie or whatever it is you use to edit, but what are you supposed to do next? Editing is, beyond a doubt, the most time-consuming part of the filmmaking process. Sometimes a shoot that only takes 3 weeks can be in the edit for a year or more, and editors are always looking for ways to work fast. The enemy of working fast is not knowing where your footage is stored, and so editors will usually take a long time to set everything up perfectly. At first I thought this was a waste of time, but the more I edit, the more I realize that this is actually time very well spent. And that's the second step to starting your edit off right. Organize it. I do this the same way every time. I use separate bins or folders or whatever they're called in your program for all the different types of assets that I might need to deal with. So there'll be one for A-roll, B-roll, voiceover, music, sound effects, stills, VFX, etc. Not every project will have every asset type, but it's fine to leave these empty. It took me an embarrassingly long time to realize that I could just save this setup to a template and then work from it every time without having to remake the folders manually every time. Luckily now I'm a little bit smarter and I just open the same template, hit save as, and rename it according to whatever project I'm working on. Getting yourself set up like this will be a big help when it comes to knowing exactly where everything is and what it is. But looking at a long list of generic file names doesn't help much when you want to find a specific shot really quickly. A big part of being a good editor is all about speed. And there's nothing fast about scanning through a 2-minute clip while you look for a specific moment. By the time you find what you're looking for, the flow is interrupted and can be really hard to get it back. Commercials and feature films are usually storyboarded, and each shot is set up one at a time very carefully. At the end of each shot, the director yells cut and the crew starts to set up for the next one. In docs, where the action is just unfolding in front of the camera, I cover a scene or action in a single unbroken take. So for example, if I was filming a scene of someone cooking, I might start on a medium shot and then move in for a close-up of the hands and then come back up to the face. All of that before cutting. This means that every file in my edit might actually have 3 or 4 separate shots, and that's not at all obvious at first glance. So how do we make this easier and faster? When I first started moving seriously from photography into cinematography, I took a really great course called Inside the Edit, and that's where I learned the system that I use now for easily seeing all of your shots. And the third step in setting up your edit for success is directly stolen from them, and that's to make dailies. Dailies, or rushes, or whatever you want to call them, are all the shots from each day with all the bad parts cut away and laid out one after another on a timeline. First, let me explain why they're useful, and then I'll go over how I make them. Making dailies means that you can scan through all of the shots from that day super quickly and find the one you'll need without having to scan through all of the out of focus moments or the parts where the camera is moving between shots. If you look at this really old project where I followed my friend Brad for 2 weeks as he traveled around Lake Huron by bike, I made dailies for each shoot day, which then allowed me to find every available shot just using the up and down arrow keys. If all these shots were still trapped inside their individual clips, it would take a lot more time to find what I was looking for. And even though it might be annoying, making dailies also has the benefit of forcing you to watch everything that you've shot. That way you know everything that you have. This usually gives me a much better sense of the material I have to work with and helps to shape the story in my head as I continue with the shoot. Making dailies is easy. Just go through the clips one by one in whatever editing program you use, and every time you find a shot that has potential, set an in point at the start, play the shot through to the end, and then set an out point. Then drop that clip into a sequence along with all the others that you have from the same scene or day. When it's done, you'll have all your shots together in one place and you can find what you're looking for really, really fast. This might seem like it takes a lot of time, and it does, but I can't stress enough how much faster this makes editing once it's done. When I'm struggling to find the right shot, I just go to my daily sequence, scan through them all super fast until I find something that works, and then copy and paste it onto my edit. So those 3 steps, backing up and ingesting properly, organizing the footage, and making dailies, have made my editing experience so much better. It takes time to do it right, but in the long run, it will be a lot faster than working with a sloppy and disorganized system that will only cause you stress. So do yourself a favor and start your edit off on the right foot. You'll find editing much faster and hopefully much less stressful. If you like that, you might also be interested in seeing the opposite end of the project, which is the beginning and how I come up with ideas and turn them into docs. So check out this video of how I turned a random idea I had while driving around in my friend's smart car into a $25,000 project. See ya!